Hi, I'm Monica Smith, and I'm one of the co-creators of Revel 11. And if you're new to our community, we started hosting events maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And we chose topics that we were interested in and our peers were interested in. And from there, it just grew this amazing community that I am so thrilled to be part of. So welcome to this community. And Jenn, we're so thrilled to have you.
Hi,
One
I'm
of the
excited to be
reasons
here.
I'm so excited to have you is because I feel like I identify with being a highly sensitive person. And I'm sure that a lot of you can relate to this, but oftentimes I feel somewhat ashamed to be asking to turn the music down or try to find a quieter table or whatever it is. So I'm really hopeful that Jenn will help us reframe that and just own it. Put that shame aside. So Jenn, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'll do my best. I would love to help you reframe that.
Yes, I'm sure we could all use a little tips around that. So if you don't, I know I sent out the bio to everyone yesterday, but Jenn, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about how you arrived here, how you started studying this topic. And by the way, congratulations on your new book. We'll have a link to it in the chat area too, if you guys want to go ahead and buy it.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been writing about introversion and sensitivity for about a decade. I'm a journalist and I started a blog called Introvert Dear, DEAR, like Dear John, not like the animal deer. I started that about 10 years ago where I wanted to share my personal journey, being an introvert and a sensitive person. And, it was supposed to be just like a fun personal project, but people were really interested and hungry for that information. So it grew. And ever since then, I've been writing about these topics. I wrote a book about introverts first, and then I just recently released my next book called Sensitive.
Well, again, congratulations. That's a major accomplishment. And it was just released, everyone, in late February. So this is all fairly recent. I am really curious what you consider to be, what it really means to be a highly sensitive person.
Yeah. So a lot of people get that wrong. When I talk about sensitivity, they think I'm talking about someone who is easily offended or cries at the drop of a hat. And yes, sensitive people do cry. I'm one of them. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we're talking about sensitivity as a personality trait. So I like to say that a sensitive person is simply someone whose body and mind respond more to the world around them. So you respond more to heartbreak and pain and loss, but you also respond to good things more, like joy or beauty or new ideas. So your mind is going deep where other minds might only skim the surface. Your brain is taking in more information, and your brain and your nervous system together are doing more with that information.
And does it apply to sensory inputs as well, just like my description of loud music?
Yes, absolutely. So, like I said, we might think of a sensitive person as someone who cries more easily. And yes, we might cry when we have an emotional experience. But, when your body is taking in more information and doing more with it, that applies to your physical environment too. So, a lot of sensitive people feel some discomfort when there are maybe bright lights or a really hard chair that they're sitting on, or when the volume of something is a little too loud. Or maybe they're just like out at a restaurant, one of these like modern restaurants that we have where everything is like concrete and hard surfaces, right? And it's just very loud and there are a lot of people in there. That might be an uncomfortable experience for a sensitive person because you're taking in all that information about your physical world as well.
That's so funny. Here I am sitting on this ridiculous like bubble cushion on my chair.
Oh, you should see my setup. I have like this back cushion and like, oh yeah, like everything's got to be just, very, very
Even
just
like the
so
label
so.
in my little dress is like bugging me like crazy because
Oh,
it's scratching my back.
oh my God. I like cut so many tags out of things because they
Oh, that's
just
so funny.
drive me crazy. Yeah. And that's, that's an aspect of sensitivity. You're feeling that tag, you're feeling the hardness of the chair. It's, yeah, it's all sensitivity.
Okay, are people out there relating to this? You can put it in the chat area. I'm also super curious if highly sensitive people are also generally introverts.
That's a good question. So a lot of sensitive people are introverts. Elaine Aron, who's the researcher who coined the term highly sensitive person, she estimates that about 70% of highly sensitive people are also introverts. But you can be an extrovert and be a sensitive person. I know a lot of extroverted, sensitive people. And if you're introverted versus extroverted, your sensitivity might look a little different. If you're an introverted, sensitive person, you might want that alone time. You might find yourself withdrawing more into quiet, calm places. And that's not to say that an extroverted, sensitive person doesn't need that downtime and that quiet and calm too. But an extroverted, sensitive person is going to, be more outgoing and maybe have an easier time at a party or a social event because they have that extroversion part of their personality too.
Do you know if it's genetic, or do you have a theory around if it's genetic or if it's learned or conditioned behavior?
Yeah, I love this question. I got to write an entire chapter about this for the book. So I will try to just like give you the very basics of it. But so yes, the thought is that it is somewhat genetic. So scientists have identified or are in the process of identifying, I should say, a pattern of genes that may contribute to a person's sensitivity. And they've called those genes different things over the years, but right now they're calling them plasticity genes. And plasticity genes just mean how much your environment shapes you. So this is probably something you're born with, and it's probably something that will stick with you for life. But of course, your experiences also shape how sensitive you are. And there's another emerging idea that a person's childhood environment shapes how sensitive they are. So if you were, it's extreme environments. If you were raised in some sort of extreme environment where therefore, whether on the good side or the bad side, you'll probably become a little more sensitive. So for example, if you were raised in, sadly an abusive or neglectful environment, you might have become a little more sensitive because it would benefit you. It would benefit you to be able to pay attention to your caregivers, to notice their moods, to notice little things in your environment. It might have been a survival strategy.
Mhm.
But on the other end, if you were raised in a very good and loving and enriching environment, well, you might have become a little more sensitive so that you could soak up all the benefits of that enriching environment. So it's just amazing. These different things contribute to our level of sensitivity. But yes, there is probably a genetic basis. It's probably something you were born with.
How do you know if you're a highly sensitive person? Is there like a test?
Yes, there's a test in my book. So please do check that out. It's a self-assessment. Um,
Is there any way that we could know, like, is there any short version we could do while we're online?
oh gosh.
Like, what are
Yeah.
kind of like the highlight questions,
I,
or
yes, I can tell you some.
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I can talk about some of the signs of sensitivity. I don't think I have like a short quiz to like pull up right at this moment, but yes, it's in my book. It's also on there's a number of articles on my websites, Introvert Dear, and also Sensitive Refuge. So that would be like a good place people could go after this if they want to take some sort of test. But I would say some signs that you're a sensitive person are you respond to your environment. So maybe loud sounds bother you, maybe bright lights bother you, maybe itchy clothing bothers you, right? I have a son who I believe is sensitive, and When a motorcycle or a siren goes by, he gets really upset and he's covering his ears. And we were with a group of kids his age, and I noticed the other kids didn't do that. He did that,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So there's some sensory discomfort involved in sensitivity sometimes. But if you're a sensitive person, you also think more deeply about your experiences, and you're trying to make meaning out of your world, and you're trying to draw meaning from your experiences. So if you find yourself thinking about something, maybe everyone else has moved on to a different topic and you're still thinking about it, well, that might be a sign you're a sensitive person, because your brain is processing that experience or that idea deeply. And then another sign is that you have strong emotions. So you respond to your world on an emotional level. And maybe that means you soak up the beauty of your environment. Maybe you cry when you watch a movie. Maybe you feel really deeply moved by music or a piece of art. But maybe you also take things personally and have a hard time with criticism and feel, you know, um, toxic environments or toxic relationships can be especially difficult for sensitive people. They're difficult for all of us, right? Sensitive or
Yeah.
not. But those negative experiences or those toxic situations can hit sensitive people even harder, because we're thinking about things longer and we're
Mhm.
processing them more deeply. And it can be harder to shrug off those things if you're a sensitive person.
I don't know if you saw in the chat area, but Laura, thank you so much for sharing your experience of, I feel like mine may have started when my mom died or it was amplified. Do you see that very often, that it's triggered by something that is fairly traumatic?
Yes, I think when you're dealing with a situation of loss, and I'm sorry that, I'm sorry to hear about that. Yeah, I think loss and grief can make us more sensitive in a way. You just feel more raw and vulnerable when you're going through something like that.
And why is it important to know? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is it important to know if you're a highly sensitive person? And I know that we'll get to how do you deal with it, but
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is really important to know. I remember when I first learned about the trait, quite a while ago, when I came across some research about it. It really helped me understand myself better, and it helped me understand and explain some of the things I'd struggled with for a lot of my life. And it also was this really good feeling, like, oh my gosh, there people out there who cut the tags out of their clothing too, right? um, or I'm not the only one who's feeling really moved after I watch a theater performance. So it's I think it can help to give that sense of I'm not alone. But then also when you can put a name to something that you deal with, you can also then work to overcome the challenges you experience related to it, and then also lean into your strengths.
I have a funny little story, but I had been with my husband for maybe like 7 years at this point, and I was finally starting to accept that I was an introvert and a highly sensitive person. And we were on some experience where it was facilitated and we were going through this, and this all came out and we were both there. And afterwards he said, I'm not sure if I can be married to an introvert because I'm such an extrovert. And it was so ridiculous. And now we laugh about it all the time. Like, I'm the same person I was last year and the year
Right, right,
before.
right.
But it was the label that bugged him so much.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I'm really
Yeah, I get
curious,
that.
like, how is it that there's such a negative stigma, or maybe that this is just my experience, but do
Mm.
you find that there's a negative stigma against people who are either introverts or highly sensitive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just talk about when I was writing my book. People asked, "What are you writing about?" And I said, "I'm writing about highly sensitive people." And sometimes people would know what that meant, which was great. but most of the time people didn't know what that label or that phrase meant. So they would say things like, "Oh, good, you're going to tell society to stop being so sensitive or stop being so offended." I heard the term snowflake more than once. So yeah, we don't really have the right idea of what it means to be sensitive. And in part, that's because there are a lot of different definitions of that word, right? We can use sensitive to mean a subject that's embarrassing to talk about, or one that might be a little controversial. So I think sensitivity as a personality trait has gotten this bad reputation.
Mhm. Well, what are some of the contributions that you think that sensitive people have contributed to our society?
Yeah. So, sensitive people have a lot of gifts. I think if you're a sensitive person, a lot of times you focus on the challenges that you experience because it is hard. It's hard to be a sensitive person in this insensitive world. And there are only about 30% of the population
Mhm.
who are highly sensitive. So a lot of people that you meet are not going to be sensitive. They're not going to be like you. So I think there can also be this feeling of feeling different or feeling alienated if you're a sensitive person. So, anyways, all that to say, I love to focus on the gifts and the strengths of sensitive people because we really do have some incredible strengths. For one, we have empathy. Sensitive people are wired to have more empathy. Their brains actually, areas of the brain light up when, scientists are peeking into the brain under a brain scan. Areas of the brain light up related to empathy. They're more active in sensitive people. So we're just wired to care more about people, which I think is amazing. Uh, if you're a sensitive person, you might be saying, yeah, but it also hurts to care more about people. And I get that, right? Because I live that reality every day. But your empathy can really be an amazing gift. It makes you a wonderful partner or parent or coworker or friend. You're probably that person that people come to talk to and to get advice from. It can make you a good leader because we need leaders with empathy and compassion. I could go on. There are a lot of gifts of sensitive people. Um, we name a lot of them in our book. So there's sensory intelligence. So that's being able to be more in tune with your environment. Athletes, people in the military have to have high sensory intelligence. Creativity is a gift of sensitive people, right? So you're taking in information, your brain is making more connections. So it makes sense that you would have more creative output, writing a
Describe the
song or
athlete
writing.
one.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So um in our book we talk about Wayne Gretzky, right? I'm not a big hockey person, but um I did some research about him. So that is sensory intelligence is being more in tune with what's going on in the physical environment around you. So, we talked about the bright lights, the clothing tags already, but you can imagine how this would also help if you're an athlete. You can see where the ball is. You can see where the ball is going to be in a few
Mhm.
seconds. You can notice cues from your teammates. And having that awareness of your environment can just be a really incredible strength if you're an athlete.
And have there been many studies? I'm thinking of like spies. And,
I have not
like,
talked to any spies. Or maybe I have and they just didn't tell me. Who
but
knows?
like with athletes or with other, like, have there ever been studies that have shown that there's a higher percentage within those fields that are highly sensitive people?
I can't say that I can point to any study definitively that says that. But just, through the research that I did for my book, I think some of the most exceptional people are often sensitive people. I
Mhm.
spoke to the woman who runs the Gifted and Talented Center, and she talked about how in her research, there's a big overlap between sensitive people and brilliance. In fact,
Mhm.
she said some of the people with the highest IQs are both introverted and sensitive. And that makes sense, right? Because your brain is thinking deeply, you're taking in information from your environment, you're doing more with it, you're processing it more deeply. So yeah, I mean, to me, that connection between sensitivity and brilliance is pretty clear. I'm not saying like every introvert and sensitive person is some sort of genius or something like that, right? But I think we do have these ways that we are exceptional, and we have these strengths and these talents.
I would love to hear from the audience about this, but I know for me, um, going back to that empathy piece, I have always been a pretty good listener.
Hmm.
And I'm always a little bit surprised and disappointed, and maybe even I get hurt when I'm in a social situation and people don't ask questions.
Yes.
And I love asking questions because I'm so curious. And so I wonder if also that is a common trait. And I would love for people in the audience to respond to this. Um, do you find yourself in a similar situation? Like, do you find that you're like, I rule it as what is wrong with society? Like, is no one curious about what other people do or about the world around them? Um, and I think that that's probably a cynical view, but maybe it's just that other people don't think like I do. And if you're saying it's only 30% or, so that leaves 70% of people aren't quite as empathetic, or I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just say full disclosure, I've been doing some dating lately and I have experienced this quite a bit. Like, why won't you ask me questions about myself? I'm asking questions about you. Anyways, I think on some level that's sort of, maybe one of those relationship or conversational skills that people just are lacking. But I also think that sensitive people do this naturally because we're curious about others and we're empathetic. And sensitive people tend to have a high emotional intelligence. We know what makes other people feel comfortable. And so we want to draw them out. We listen to them. We want to make them feel good and feel cared for. So yeah. And yeah, personally, I just have a very intense interest in other people and their stories and their lives. And it's interesting, sensitive people, I like to say that other people are the brightest spot on sensitive people's radar. So we're really tuned into people. We're not just tuned into our environment, we're tuned into other people. And we're noticing those little cues, we're noticing those little micro expressions that flash on someone's face and then are gone, in just a half a second. And we're reading their emotions well. So yeah, I think that like curiosity and that emotional intelligence tends to come more naturally to sensitive people.
Yeah. Any tips for those of us who tend to get a little bit hurt by people not asking questions, or maybe, you know, I don't know. Do you have any tips for us?
That's a great question. I think personally, I've just learned that over the years, not everyone has the same capacity for intimacy or, empathy and caring. And it helps me to put, when I think about it that way, it helps me to put the focus more on the other person instead of on me and personalizing it. Right. I think it's important to see other people's maybe rude or unpleasant behavior. It's
Mhm.
easy for us sensitive people to personalize it and say, like, well, what did I do wrong to deserve this? Or why did they do this to me? Or, something I did created this reaction in this person. So I think it's important to try to depersonalize it and put that rude or unpleasant behavior back on the other person and say, it's
Mhm.
not something I did, it's the way that this person is.
I can't remember if it was in your book or one of the articles that you've written, but you talk about common language to use or to avoid. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure, like when we're talking about sensitivity, like what to say or not say. Yeah, well, I would say the biggest one is don't tell someone you're too sensitive. We've
Mm.
probably all been told that at some point in my life. I can remember being told that a lot, especially when I was a child. And I think sometimes people, maybe they even have good intentions. Maybe they're trying to, help you, but I think it hurts to hear that. So I'd like us to just put to rest that phrase and not say that anymore, ever. I don't think there's a right or wrong level of sensitivity to be. And it can also be a bit of a form of gaslighting because you're telling someone what you perceive is not accurate. And let me tell you what you should be perceiving. Maybe somebody says that after they say a joke that was hurtful. They make a joke, you get hurt, and then they say, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive about that." Well, the truth is it hurt you, right? And it's sort of a way for that person then to avoid responsibility for their own words or actions. So I don't like it. I think we need to retire that phrase.
Do you have any suggestions for how to come back with a response?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I like to remind people there's not a right or wrong level of sensitivity to be. And I think it depends on the situation.
That's a good one.
Yeah. If I think if you know someone, if you know someone well and you know that they weren't trying to actually gaslight you or hurt you, maybe they just sort of said it flippantly. I think then is a good time to have a conversation about what it really means to be a sensitive person. And I like to encourage sensitive people to be proud of their sensitivity and to present it as a good thing. I like to say, I like that I'm sensitive. I think it's one of the best traits about me. And then I think,
that.
yeah. It's about owning it. It's about presenting it as a good thing and knowing yourself that it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
I think if you're getting this phrase repeatedly from someone who doesn't want to take responsibility for their actions or somebody who crosses your boundaries, I think that's a different conversation. And I think maybe then it's time to evaluate if that relationship is a good one for you to continue.
I love the comment that was just put in the chat. It's a superpower, not a fault. Woo!
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I like to say that your sensitivity is your greatest strength.
How about leadership? Do you think highly sensitive people make great leaders?
I do. Yeah. I think a lot of sensitive people shy away from leadership because we don't necessarily want that attention. And I think we have this idea that the leader needs to be this loud or brash or dominant person. But in reality, I think sensitive people have the exact traits that we need in leaders. We need them to be empathetic and compassionate. We need them to be able to tune into other people and think about other people's perspectives and maybe put other people's needs or wants above their own. I think sensitive people can be really inspirational figures, so they can rally people together and inspire them to a cause and get them moving in the right direction. And I think sensitive people often tend to have a strong moral compass. And, we need our leaders to be moral people who are out for good. So yeah, I think sensitive people have an incredible capacity to be leaders if we would feel the courage to step up and step into leadership.
Can you think, I'm trying to think off the top of my head of examples of either, just famous people or leaders. And do you have any on the top of your mind?
Sure. There's a good list in my book of famous people who are sensitive people. We think maybe Martin Luther King Jr. was a sensitive person. Perhaps Rosa Parks was a sensitive person. Perhaps Abraham Lincoln was a sensitive person. So if you think about inspirational figures throughout history, a lot of them are sensitive people.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, we can't go back in time and give them a personality test, right? So we don't know for sure. But looking at their life and their biographies, they show traits of sensitive people.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any questions out there? Because otherwise we'll probably be wrapping up. soon, but I am curious. I mean, maybe this is just too silly of a question, but how do we, as highly sensitive people, unlock our potential?
No, that is not a silly question at all. I think the first step is to be aware of your sensitivity. The first step is to be aware. The first step is to be mindful of it. And then I think once you understand that you have this trait, you can figure out the things that are challenging to you, but then also lean into your strengths. So one thing I like to coach sensitive people to do is to just notice throughout their day how their bodies and emotions are feeling. Because a lot of times as sensitive people, we have this strong emotion, the strong intuition and these strong emotions, but we've turned it off or we've dialed it down, or we've been told not to care about how we feel, right? Just buck up, get through it, push through, you'll be fine, right? This is something we call the toughness myth in our book. So start tuning into your body. Notice where you feel tension. Notice where you feel discomfort or pain. Tune into your emotions. How does that person make you feel when you talk to them? How are you feeling about this task you have in front of you? Start by being more mindful and start by listening to yourself, because our bodies and minds are taking in so much information all the time. A lot of times we're not even aware of how much information it's taking in. So it helps for us to tune in because our bodies and minds are going to tell us things that we need to know.
Yeah, I mean, it really does raise. I know there are a couple of yoga teachers out in the audience this morning, and I know I had started a morning ritual practice a couple of years ago when I was going through a health crisis. And I think because I'm a highly sensitive person, it was such a meaningful change in my life to every morning just do a breathing exercise and a grounding exercise and some visualization to start the day off right. And it's kind of a game changer. And I think probably more so for highly sensitive people, don't you think? That just having that base to start the day.
Yes, absolutely. In our book, we talk about something called the sensitive boost effect. And this is the idea that little interventions will go further for sensitive people because, everything goes further for us, right? The good and the bad. So a mindfulness practice or a self-care practice or going to therapy or just hanging out with a good friend and getting to talk and vent about life, an exercise program, journaling, whatever it is, all those little things are going to go further for you as a sensitive person. You'll get more out of it and it will give you that boost in life.
It goes along with the question, is there a relationship between depression, anxiety, autism, or other mind health conditions? Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good question. So sensitive people do report having more depression and anxiety. This doesn't mean there's something inherent to a sensitive person about, there's no inherent connection between sensitive people and depression and anxiety. We're not automatically more prone to those things, but we have bigger reactions to our world. So if something bad happens to you, you might experience more depression or anxiety. Also, our minds are going deep. We're thinking, we're overthinking, we're ruminating, right? It's easy for our minds to keep following that thought path down a rabbit hole, or I call it spiraling, right? Your mind overthinks and spirals to a bad place. So it's easy for us to go down those paths in our mind. So yeah, it is definitely one of the challenges of being a sensitive person.
Change the perception of others that we rock.
Right. Yes. We rock. Period. Done. Yes. Well, I think it starts with feeling proud yourself about your sensitivity and seeing it as a good thing. I think if I think you need to see it as a good thing yourself before other people will be able to see it as a good thing. If you're walking around feeling bad because, maybe you hear a song and cry or something like that, if you're walking around feeling bad about that, then other people are going to see it in a negative light. And then I also think that we can educate people about sensitivity. And that's in part why I do the work that I do, because less sensitive people aren't even aware of what our existence is like, right? We live in a different body. We experience the world a little differently than less sensitive people do. And a lot of them just aren't even aware of what we experience, or this personality trait, or even that it's a real personality trait, right? So I think talking to people about sensitivity and talking to people about your experiences and talking about it in a positive way, that
Mhm.
can go a long way.
Yeah. And I know you touched on this earlier, but we do have a question about some of the biggest problems with supervisors and bosses is
Mm,
them communicating to stop being so sensitive and get a backbone. I
mhm.
mean, like any other suggestions to handle those kind of situations,
Oof. Well, if your boss,
especially coming from a supervisor,
right. Yeah,
it's tough.
that's really tough if your supervisor is saying things like that. Ugh. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know the details, but to me that sounds like some toxic or unhealthy behavior there on your supervisor's part. But I think it comes down to staying firm in your belief that being sensitive is a good thing. You can use that line. I'm proud of my sensitivity. I think it's one of my best traits. I like who I am. I like that I'm sensitive. I don't think there's a right or wrong level of sensitivity to be. And you might, if you feel safe enough to do so, if you feel comfortable doing so, you might want to have a conversation with your boss about why are they saying that, right? Is there some underlying thing that's going on? A lot of times people will say, stop being so sensitive or toughen up, and they don't really mean exactly that. They mean something else, but they don't know how to say it. So if you feel comfortable, communicate with that person and see if you can get some more information.
Mm.
But stay proud, stay strong in your sensitivity as a gift, because it is.
And Jen, will you just tell our audience before we wrap up how to learn more about your work?
Sure. So my book is called Sensitive. You can find it wherever books are sold. You can find me on Instagram under my name, Jenn Granneman. You can also find my website, Introvert Dear. We're all over social media. So yeah, just search for me, or search for my name. You'll find me.
And if you're part of our newsletter and signed up through Eventbrite, I also sent this out yesterday. Here's a link in the chat area for the book. But Jen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. This
Really
was a lot of
appreciate your
fun.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
an important topic, I think. Even just to know that there are like-minded people out there makes me
Right.
feel a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Yes, I get that. Thank you.